and in Vietnam during the 1960s and 70s. Studying this concept, one can apply it to various theaters around the world in the global war on terror and identify various stages in various theaters in many places in the world. I believe, for example, Hezbollah in Lebanon has worked its way nearly to the fourth stage of the insurgency process. Other groups like Al-Qaeda in Iraq are following the same course elsewhere. The third thing I'd like to talk a little bit is how they work to achieve superiority strategically internationally. Let's look at the process that fosters the doubt of some citizens that some citizens in the U.S. have today. That's why we're here tonight. Some people doubt our capabilities. The type of thinking this is the type of thinking that brings us here tonight. This is the doubt that fuels the desire to disengage, to pretend that the danger doesn't exist, to discuss, as we are here today or tonight, solutions to limit our success and move toward disengagement. The enemy has demonstrated a strong understanding and some success internationally in developing this unconventional strategy of warfare. It's evolved something like this. In the early 19th century, armies met each other on the battlefield, front line to front line. We all remember looking at those old movies of wars in the 19th century. Warriors were trained in techniques aimed at defeating their foes' front lines so as to prevail on the battlefield. There was little thought, planning, or training given to reaching beyond the front lines in battle, much less to strike directly at central governments. Today, this strategy of warfare is called first-generation warfare. Then, during the 20th century, specifically during World War I and World War II, two new generations of warfare evolved. During World War I, armies were trained to carry out tactics not only against front lines, but also against logistical supply lines. The intent was to damage the enemy's ability by reaching back beyond the battlefield front line. This is called second-generation warfare. World War II brought about third-generation warfare by using tactics to reach even further behind the lines to attack the industrial production facilities of the enemy's central governments. Finally, the most recent evolution, strategic and tactical execution of warfare designed as fourth-generation warfare. The goal, to destroy the determination of the enemy's decision makers to continue the fight. Today's decision makers are the citizens of Europe and the rest of the West, including, of course, the United States and the decision makers of the United States Congress. Unconventional tools have been used by Al-Qaeda through fourth-generation warfare and other groups to convince the decision makers to discontinue the effort. Unconventional tools such as the Western media, terrorist acts such as those on 9/11, and unconventional warfare such as killing Shia citizens, Sunni citizens, and coalition military participants with IEDs and car and truck bombs. Through the media, every one of these acts which is reported has an effect and carries a message intentionally to discourage decision makers. And that is precisely the plan, and that is precisely why we're having this debate tonight. That brings us to the debate today. Often American decision makers have been convinced through fourth-generation warfare used by Al-Qaeda and used by other groups, Shia militias and Sunni insurgents, to convince some here to vote to discontinue necessary efforts in one of the central theaters of the global war on terror, Iraq, and hence convince us not to provide the level of national security so important to the citizens and children and future generations of the United States of America. Fourth, let me talk about understanding the consequences of withdrawal and our record. Withdrawal under fire is unacceptable, and history is replete with examples of harmful consequences in doing so. Lebanon and Somalia are two examples where we presently face increased threats to our national security as a result of previously ill-timed withdrawals. As a result of the U.S. withdrawal in Lebanon, for example, after the Marine barracks bombing in 1983, the country, Lebanon, even today remains a terrorist hotbed. The withdrawal strengthened Hezbollah. It contributed to years of civil war in Lebanon. It diminished U.S. prestige in the region and influence throughout much of the world. The lingering question, could the U.S. have prevented the rise of Hezbollah and the influence of Tehran with sustained engagement in Lebanon? We'll never know. In 1993, we withdrew our forces from Somalia after a failed military operation in Mogadishu. A decade later, an Islamic militia with ties to al-Qaeda has controlled that country and is responsible for destabilizing the entire Horn of Africa. We didn't know it at the time. We decided to withdraw. It was a mistake. This radical movement briefly shows signs of regaining lost ground in Somalia, even today. At the very least, Somalia remains a dangerous, ungoverned place, and the lingering question, could the United States have prevented the spread of radicalism in the Horn of Africa with a sustained engagement in Somalia? But we withdrew. Further evidence of failure to respond to terrorism emboldened al-Qaeda. In 1993, the World Trade Center was bombed. No response. In 1996, Khobar Towers were bombed. No response. In 1998, the U.S. embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania took place. No response. In 2000, the attack on USS Cole took place. No response. Result, September 11th. The Soviet Union, we're not alone. The Soviet Union and Israel both paid heavy prices for implementing a precipitous withdrawal on two separate occasions. The Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989 and left behind the conditions of anarchy and warlordism, which ultimately led to the rise of the Taliban and provided safe haven for al-Qaeda. Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon in 2000 resulted in an empowered Hezbollah, weakened Lebanese moderates, and failed to keep peace. The best example was Hezbollah's naked aggression this past summer in delivering unbelievable attacks against northern Israel's civilian population. As one commentator has put it, this is from Victor Hansen in the National Review Online, December 1, 2006, by not responding to a decade of prior attacks in East Africa, New York, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen, and withdrawing precipitously from Lebanon and Mogadishu, we gave the fatal impression that terrorists could strike the U.S. with near impunity. That's what we're talking about doing now in Iraq. The lesson here is obvious. We must remain engaged until we complete our mission. Finally, what's at stake? It is clear that al-Qaeda and other groups constitute a serious threat to the citizens of the U.S. for this generation and, even more importantly, for the future generations. Our enemies have demonstrated significant success in carrying out activities to the detriment of the citizens of the U.S. They have successfully attacked numerous targets overseas, mostly with explosives, and have used missiles known as jumbo jets to attack New York City, in Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon. And they've used explosives in terror operations in Afghanistan, and even more successfully in Iraq, to pit the minority Sunni population against the Shia. They fueled the insurgency and have cost Sunni, Shia, as well as the lives of U.S. soldiers. Our choices may be difficult. It's not easy to be at war. It's even harder to stay at war. But it's clearly proven by history that we must not abandon the missions in the war on terror, nor in the Iraqi theater. We have seen the results of the precipitous withdrawals. It would be unconscionable to vote to do other than to support the administration's plan. We yield to the gentleman.